This is the new, not new, well actually it is new, but it's the NUU G3 Android smartphone. It's a sub $200 smartphone with NFC included. So what are the other features and is it worth it? Stick around to find out. It's TechWizTime. Hey guys, Jonathan here with TechWizTime, where I create technology tutorial and review videos. In this video I'm going to be looking at the NUU G3. But first, before we go any further, I just want to disclose that this was sent out to me by NUU, but no money's exchanged hands and thoughts and opinions are definitely my own. Hashtag free product, hashtag not an ad. So with that out of the way, let's have a look at the specs of the NUU G3. So inside this is the Helio P25 processor, and that's an 8-core, 2.39 gigahertz CPU inside. I think I mentioned it had 8 cores, I can't remember. 8 cores is definitely inside of there, so that's what you're getting with the CPU. In terms of GPU, you're getting a Mali T880 GPU, and the storage inside this one is 64 gigabytes, as well as 4 gigabytes of DDR3 memory. You've got Bluetooth in there at version 4.2, so not the latest of version 5, but still not too bad. And the Wi-Fi only comes in at 2.4 gigahertz, so that's your N band anyway. So no AC, unfortunately. The phone itself is charged by the USB-C port down below. Up the very top there, you've got your dual SIM card tray or a tray there for a micro SD card. Now, the thing that I noticed with this one is that the tray itself is a plastic instead of aluminium, which a lot of them come out with. So a little bit different, and also the placement of the micro SD card was a little bit different too. It was facing outwards instead of facing inwards. So it comes standard with 7.11 Android, which is Android Nougat, and it also comes with NFC. So that's one of the big sell points for this phone, I think. One other thing as well, the phone itself isn't rooted. So if you're looking for a rooted phone, this isn't the one for you. The battery itself comes in at 3000 milliamp hours, so not too bad. So the display itself is a 5.7 inch IPS display, but it only comes in at 720p unfortunately. So that's 1440 by 720. Next up is the cameras. So the front facing camera is 13 megapixel and the rear facing camera, there's two, is a 13 megapixel and a 5 megapixel. So let's do some tests. Like one of you commented before, I'm going to actually do a low light test and also a well lit test. So we'll see what the difference is there. So that's the rear facing camera, fairly close up with good lighting. Now what I'll do is I'll turn off the lighting with my trusty remote. Now we're in a low lit situation. So we'll take the same photo again. And you can see there the quality difference between the low light and the well lit versions. So next up what we'll do is we'll do the front facing camera and we'll do a selfie shot in good lighting and then in low lighting. Who's that gorgeous devil? And now for the low lighting shot. So there's the difference between the low light and the normal light as well. Now when it comes to the bands that this phone is capable of, as in what mobile network it's going to work on, especially considering there's so many around the world like US, Australia, Europe, UK, etc. Like you really need to know what bands this would work on. So I've got a list on the screen right now of all the different ones that will work. So if you need to check out if your phone is in those bands, or sorry, your mobile carrier is in those bands, then I've got a link down in the description below for where you can check out what your mobile carrier uses for its mobile bands. Okay, so now that we've got all the specs out of the way, what we'll do next is we'll go over some benchmarks, and lastly we'll go over some gaming tests with emulation. So first up is A1 SD Bench. Now what this does, it tests the internal read and write speeds as well as the micro SD card read and write speeds as well. So first up is the internal, and we've got the internal read speed being at 164 megabytes per second, and the internal write speed being at 131 megabytes per second. So not too bad. Next up is the micro SD card read and write speed. So the read speed we're looking there at 44 megabytes per second, and the write speed is only at 36 megabytes per second. So it might be using a USB 2 controller instead of a USB 3 controller there. So that might be the limiting factor with this phone. And lastly, the other test that we do with A1 SD Bench is the RAM speed, and this one gets a RAM speed of 6,147, so not too bad. Next up we test our Wi-Fi speeds. Now because this has only got the 2.4 gigahertz, it's not going to get the full bandwidth of my internet connections here. So the Wi-Fi download speed comes in at 48 megabits per second, and the Wi-Fi upload speed comes in at 36 megabits per second. Next up we've got the benchmarking tool M22, and here we're getting an overall score of 61,161. We're getting a CPU score of 25,786. We're getting a GPU score of 15,075. We're getting a UX score of 16,257. And lastly, we're getting a RAM score of 4,043. Next up, we've got Geekbench for the CPU, and we run the single core test there, and that gets us a score of 840, and the multi-core test comes with a score of 3,339. So next up, we test out the 3D capabilities of the phone using the tool 3D Mark. So here in the Slingshot test, we're getting a score of 927, and with Slingshot Extreme, we're getting a score of 681. Next, we do the Ice Storm test, and here we get a score of 11,586, and in Ice Storm Extreme, we get a score of 6,629. So next up, we look at two of the most popular streaming apps out there, which is Netflix and YouTube. And YouTube comes in with streaming at 720p. Now this is a limitation of the display itself, I would say, so it's not going to get you 1080p out of a 720p display. And Netflix runs fine with this phone as well. Awesome, so what we're going to do now is we're going to test out the gaming capabilities of this phone, particularly using emulation. Normally Android games should run fine on this, probably not with PUBG or Fortnite or anything like that, but it's still going to run most games fine. So I'm going to switch it up a little bit this time. I'm going to look at FPSE, which is the PlayStation 1 emulation first. Here we'll test out 3 games just to see how they run. So the first game up is Final Fantasy VII, and this one comes in easily at 60 frames per second, so not too bad. The next one up here is Metal Gear Solid, and again this one comes in at 60 frames per second as well, so great job here. And lastly, one that causes some phones a little bit of trouble, which is Tekken 3. And this phone just breezes through, getting at 60 frames per second, so pretty good. All right, so next up is Raycast Emulator, and this is the Dreamcast emulator for Android. So what we'll do here is we'll test out 3 games again. And the first game up is Sonic Adventure 2. Now this one comes in at 50 frames per second, which is really great, especially considering this is the PAL version of the game. Next up, we've got Shenmue, and again, this one comes in at 30 frames per second here, so not too bad. And lastly, we've got Soul Calibur. Now, this one can be a little bit glitchy on any phone, but here we're getting about 45 to 55 frames per second. So not the full 60 frames per second here, but not too bad as well. All right, so lastly, this is where we actually test out how powerful this phone is, and it's with PlayStation Portable Emulation using the emulator PPSSPP. So the first game up we'll test here is Power Stone, and this game is coming in at 35 to 45 frames per second. So not the full 60 frames per second, but still, you probably get away with playing it, I think. And lastly, the one that really tests these phones is God of War. And here, unfortunately, we're only getting between 10 and 15 frames per second. So this powerhouse is not gonna run on this little phone here. Still, it was worth a try. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna give you the pros and cons of this phone, according to me. Now, this is opinion-based, so it's gonna be different for everyone, but this is what I think of the phone anyway. So when it comes to pros, Dreamcast and PlayStation 1 emulation working on this is fantastic, so huge pro there. Having the USB Type-C connector down the bottom is another pro. One of the things that some phones are lacking these days, they're still using the micro USB. Another pro is the NFC on this phone, especially considering it's under $200. I think it's one of the cheapest ones I've seen with NFC, so really great job there. Being Netflix compatible is another huge pro here. A lot of the phones are, but some of them don't, so having that as an option to play Netflix on your mobile phone is fantastic. And lastly, one of the other features is having a groovy power button, so you can actually feel it instead of pressing one of the volume up or down buttons. Which leads me on to my cons. One of the cons with this phone, I believe, is having the power and the volume all on the one side. Fair enough, the groovy power button does actually, let you know which one you're pressing, but when it comes to the up or down volume, you don't know until you actually press it. Not being able to play PSP games at full speed is probably another con in my opinion. I like playing PlayStation Portable games on the go, so this phone not being able to do that is one of my cons. Having a 720p screen instead of a 1080p screen is another con here. It's not a huge deal because, a lot of the phones these days are coming out with 4K screens, but 720p just feels a little bit behind. Shipping this phone with DDR3 memory, again, is probably another downside because DDR4 is a lot faster and it's going to get you better speeds when it comes to running emulation and so forth. So having DDR3 in there, I think, is another con. And the last con that I've got here is the 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi. It should really have AC, like AC Wi-Fi is pretty standard these days. Again, this was probably in there so that way they could put NFC in there instead and so forth. So I can sort of understand what their reasoning was for going for N network instead of AC. So if you're interested in this phone, there is a link down in the description below. Do you want to see more great technology tutorial and review videos? Then make sure you subscribe to this video and also hit the bell icon to receive email notifications. Do you like what we're doing here? Then make sure you give it a big thumbs up and also consider checking out a Patreon campaign where you can help support the channel. Consider sharing this video on social media platforms like Facebook or Reddit. And also don't forget to check out these other awesome videos that I've created here. And as always, imagine, learn, create.